On June 24, 1944, at the Iwima airfield in the Barnon Islands, the runway coated in volcanic ash gleamed under the early heat. Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai clutched the joystick of his Mitsubishi A6 M5, his palms bearing the marks of a fighter who had downed more hostile planes than many aviators could dream of. Peering out from the cockpit, he scanned the eastern sky, anticipating the imminent arrival of U.S. carrier-based fighters, not in the orderly groups of 1941, but in massive flocks that blotted out the heavens like gathering thunderheads. We downed them weakly, yet they returned in droves, always in droves. This remark, shared with a comrade mere moments prior to departure, would resonate eternally as the final lament of Japanese carrier aviation. With 28 verified air-to-air triumphs under his belt, Sakai stood as one of Japan's top scoring aces, perceiving truths that the novice flyers nearby hadn't yet comprehended. They were confronting the inescapable logic of loss, inscribed not in strategic blueprints, but in output figures that diminished personal valor to irrelevance. Roughly 600 meters eastward, Task Force 58 unleashed its dawn assault force. 15 flat tops spewed forth 450 planes in coordinated surges. The previous week had cost the U.S. 89 aircraft, but today they dispatched fivefold that amount without hesitation. Aboard the USS Essex, USS Yorktown, and USS Lexington, young ensigns with just 400 hours in the cockpit readied themselves for initial sorties, secure in the knowledge that an industrial pipeline churned out 3 replacement Hellcats for each casualty. The equation of devastation had long been calculated. In 1944 alone, the United States would fabricate 96,318 planes, surpassing Japan's total wartime production to that point. The path leading to this era of numerical inevitability originated 16 years prior, amid the sweltering days of 1928, when a young Saburo Sakai lingered at the entrance to the Kobe Naval Facility. Born on August 25, 1916, in Saga Prefecture, as the third child among 8 in a destitute agrarian household tracing roots to samurai lineage, Sakai joined the Imperial Japanese Navy at 16, fleeing the barren prospects of village life dominated by paddies and obligations. The screening for flight duty was intentionally brutal. From the Yanadi 500 hopefuls in his 1937 cohort at the Sakoshi Naval Aviation School, merely 70 secured their pilot badges. Attrition topped 95%, a calculated filter to forge exceptional airmen over mere proficient ones. Aspirants faced ordeals that shattered limbs and resolve, dangling from metal rods until blood flowed from their grips, battling frigid winter waters until numbness gripped them, drilling maneuvers until nausea struck, then resuming without pause. Sakai finished 11th in his group on November 27, 1937, boasting 650 logged hours, a tally that would astonish U.S. regiments only 5 years hence. Assigned to the 12th Kokutai Air Group, he encountered warfare over China from 1938 to 1939, piloting the Mitsubishi A5M versus outdated Chinese bipeds. His initial victory occurred on October 5, 1938, near Hankou, a Soviet-designed Polikarpov Ir-16 that erupted in fire from a 2-second volley of his 7.7mm guns. By May 1941, transferring to the Tainan Kokutai on Formosa, Sakai had amassed more than 800 flying hours and 4 accredited kills. The prestigious Tainan unit epitomized the zenith of Japanese sea-based flying, housing aviators destined for mythic status. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, slated for 87 successes before perishing, Toshio Oda with 34, Masajiro Ishikawa with 27. These warriors viewed themselves as modern samurai descendants, sky-born combatants whose prowess and resolve would triumph over any shortfall in resources. The initial hint of challenges ahead emerged on December 8, 1941. December 7th beyond the dateline, during Sakai's role in the strike on Clark Field in the Philippines. Providing cover for 54 G-4M bombers, the Zeros surprised the Americans utterly, though alerts had arrived 9 hours earlier. Post-Pearl Harbor, Sakai claimed a P-40 Warhawk, observing the enemy craft shatter beneath his armament. On the terrain below, orderly lines of B-17 flying fortresses blazed in a scene Sakai later likened to a woodland blaze. What most impressed upon Sakai wasn't the straightforward success, but the vast scale of losses. More than 100 U.S. machines wiped out in one dawn. If the enemy dared expose such abundance, despite foreknowledge of conflict, what stockpiles did they command? The opening phase of 1942 appeared to affirm Japan's faith in excellence surpassing volume. On February 3rd, from the freshly seized outpost at Rabaul, Sakai clashed over Bougainville, showcasing the Zero's edge and agility against U.S. Wildcats unable to rival its agility. In those heady times, the success rate seemed to endorse Japan's instructional approach. During the Battle of the Java Sea on February 27th, Sakai's unit eliminated Mul. Japanese fighters achieved striking dominance in the skies during the opening months of 1942, destroying numerous Allied planes while suffering just a few Zero losses. Above Darwin Harbor, the Tainan Kokutai racked up a series of triumphs on February 19th, with scant casualties on their side. Single pilots from Japan were felling several foe aircraft in single clashes. Yet, amid these battlefield successes, ominous trends surfaced for anyone paying close attention. Following the downing of a B-17 in the early part of that year, Sakai observed the bomber's remarkable resilience, enduring heavy damage before it finally fell. Throughout the ordeal, the U.S. aircraft's gunners delivered precise and relentless defensive fire, firing steadily even as fire consumed the body of the plane. Even more alarming were the replenishment speeds. When Allied units suffered plane shortages, fresh ones materialized almost immediately. In contrast, Japanese fighter deficits required weeks to fill with shipments from the home islands. The numbers were straightforward yet overlooked. The Allies outpaced Japan's destruction rate in restoring their forces. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima, operations head for the Tainan Kokutai, quietly figured that given ongoing attrition compared to U.S. manufacturing projections, Japan would require a 10.1 destruction advantage merely to break even by 1944. In truth, they managed 3.1 at most. On August 7, 1942, at 0530 hours, the urgent alert at Rabaul's Lakunai airfield spurred pilots toward their machines. U.S. troops had launched assaults on Guadalcanal and Tulagi, taking the Japanese entirely off guard. Sakai climbed aboard his Zero, part of a 18-plane escort detail for 27 G4M bombers heading 560 nautical miles to Guadalcanal, the farthest such fighter sortie tried up to then. The voyage pushed physical limits to the extreme. Over 4 hours above the Solomon Sea, Sakai kept tight formation, controlling fuel use with exacting care. Any minor throttle overreach or extra turn risked a splashdown amid shark-filled seas on the way home. Trailing him, novice airmen fresh from training mere weeks prior fought to hold their spots, their tanks depleting quicker than planned. By 13:15, they reached Guadalcanal airspace, confronting an armada beyond belief. The sea teemed with warships, Sakai later recounted in his 1957 autobiography, Samurai. I tallied more than 70 ships, among them what looked like 6 carriers. Actually, 82 Allied vessels were present, featuring 3 big carriers, Enterprise, Saratoga, and Wasp, sending up non-stop fighter sweeps. What unfolded next etched itself into flying lore. Sakai claimed a dauntless dive bomber, then locked into an extended skirmish with Lieutenant James Pugh Sutherland's Wildcat from VF-5 aboard the Saratoga. For almost 20 minutes, the pair spiraled across the heavens in a textbook aerial ballet. Both aviators urged their mounts to the brink. Sutherland, a seasoned flyer boasting over 500 hours in battle, mirrored Sakai's every twist until his guns ran dry, compelling retreat. Yet the critical episode of that day struck at 1450, when Sakai eyed what seemed like 8 Wildcats drifting casually 8,000 feet lower. He banked into a steep descent from their rear blind zone, the 6 position. He neared 50 meters before grasping his deadly blunder. Not fighters, but SBD Dauntless dive bombers packing tail gunners, aviation machinists mate second class. Harold Lew Jones, the gunner in Lieutenant Dudley Adams's Dauntless from VS-5, unleashed his twin 30-caliber Browning machine guns right as Sakai caught on. The shots landed with lethal precision. One pierced Sakai's cranium just over his right eye, obliterating it on impact. A second grazed the bone, triggering partial numbness on his left. Blood poured into his good eye, leaving him virtually sightless. What ensued ranked among the most astonishing displays of piloting skill in history. Barely aware, half immobilized and struggling to peer ahead, Sakai navigated 560 nautical miles to Rabaul, relying solely on volcanic ash clouds for guidance. Over 4 hours and 47 minutes, awareness flickered as he teetered multiple times toward flipping into the waves below. He touched down at Rabaul around 1800 hours with under 10 liters of fuel left. The operations tally exposed the harsh truth. Japan forfeited 23 planes and aircrews. The U.S. shed fewer aircraft and pulled most shot-down pilots from the sea. As Japan grappled to rebuild its 24 missing machines, American flat-tops welcomed fresh aircraft straight from West Coast assembly lines. During Sakai's 8-month hospital recovery, the aerial campaign above Guadalcanal shredded the Imperial Japanese Navy's flying arm like an unyielding harvester. Figures from that stretch laid bare the relentless arithmetic sealing Japan's flying fate. From August 1942 through February 1943, the Japanese Navy sacrificed almost 900 aircraft across the Solomons. For every plane stood a pilot, with a MI-experienced Japanese pilots amassed at least 500 hours in the air, often surpassing 1,000, embodying a massive investment in years of rigorous preparation that their nation couldn't afford to lose. By early 1943, pilot academies were turning out just 100 graduates each month, and those newcomers had training reduced to as few as 400 hours. On the other side, the U.S. was producing 2,500 naval aviators per month solely from Pensacola, plus thousands more out of Corpus Christi, Jacksonville, and San Diego. Every U.S. pilot logged no less than 400 flying hours, with 100 of those in frontline aircraft models. Upon arriving in battle areas, they joined units alongside seasoned flyers who guided them via initial sorties. In October 1942, Commander Minoru Genda, the mastermind behind the Pearl Harbor strike, inspected Guadalcanal and returned horrified. In an ultra-secret memo handed directly to Admiral Yamamoto, he declared, "Our naval air forces are being ground down in this grinding contest of attrition. Victory is impossible. The foe replenishes its depleted ranks right away. We have no way to do the same." To counter this, Japan pursued clever battlefield adjustments, pushing operational reach from Rabaul via advance outposts, launching huge interceptor patrols, and devising fresh strategies. Yet, such measures proved futile against the tide of superior quantity. This gap in output highlighted a profound industrial chasm. Prior to wartime involvement in 1940, America built 12,184 warplanes. Japan, locked in conflict with China for 3 years, barely hit 4,768. U.S. output then hovered at peacetime pace, while Japan's was maxed out. The Pearl Harbor assault flipped American manufacturing into overdrive. Ford's Willow Run facility in Michigan, a site non-existent in 1940, was churning out B-24 Liberator bombers at 1 every 63 minutes come 1944. Its vast interior dwarfed the total space of all Japanese plane factories put together. During full swing, 42,000 employees pieced together bombers from 150,000 components. North American aviation delivered more than 15,000 P-51 Mustangs, outclassing the Zero in velocity, armament, protection, and high-level operations. Grumman rolled out 12 975 F-6F Hellcats over a mere 30 months, a machine tailored to neutralize the Zero. The fighter that downed more enemy planes than any rival did so at a clip of over a dozen daily. The imbalance went further, touching on cutting-edge progress. As Japan labored to sustain output of the fading Zero, the U.S. unveiled brand-new designs every few months. The F-4U Corsair sped past the Zero by 80 mph. The P-38 Lightning, with its dual motors and fierce guns, struck from heights where the Zero's power plant faltered. Midway through 1943, U.S. engines generated 2,000 horsepower against the Zero's 130. American pursuits featured protective plating. The Zero offered zero. U.S. aircraft ran on high-octane fuel, granting far greater thrust than Japan's aviation blend. Sakai resumed restricted service in June 1943, his right eye irreparably gone and spatial judgment impaired. Stationed at Toyohashi Air Base to teach, he saw the unraveling of Japan's aviation instruction firsthand. Incoming trainees from basic schools arrived with only 150 hours aloft, far below what American pilots got prior to handling war machines. "Our job was to forge these kids into ace fighters within 3 months," Sakai reflected in a 1985 talk. "Most struggled just to touch down without wrecking. All we did was dispatch them to their graves. Even the practice planes exposed the shortages. Advanced models, battered from China's front and endlessly repaired, scarcely stayed airborne. Fuel rations limited each learner to 60 hours during practical phases. Parts were non-existent. Broken units got stripped to sustain the rest. Teaching staff mainly comprised scarred survivors like Sakai, warriors unfit for duty, yet too valuable to sideline. These broken experts endeavored to impart wisdom to youths doomed never to apply it." Figures from 1943's later classes paint a grim picture. Most graduates perished in combat within half a year. Despite his wounds, Sakai offered to rejoin the fight in June 1944. The U.S. assault on the Marianas risked placing B-29s close enough to bomb Japan's core islands. All hands were summoned, even sight-impaired old hands who merited medical beds. Sakai joined Yokosuka Kokutai and shipped to Iwo Jima on June 24, 1944. He landed amid the chaos Americans dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where on June 19th alone, Japanese naval air lost 315 planes and 445 crewmen. The U.S. suffered just 29 aircraft. They managed to retrieve the majority of their aviators. During his initial sortie from Iwima on June 24th, Sakai confronted the harsh truth of U.S. aerial dominance. Commanding a group of 4 Zeros on a patrol to intercept enemy planes, he didn't face the straightforward groupings from 1942. Instead, he met a massive assault involving more than 200 planes, Hellcats, Avengers, and Dauntlesses, arriving in meticulously synchronized formations. The heavens seemed filled with them, he shared with historian Henry Sakida back in 1994. They approached in tiers, with fighters highest up, dive bombers in the center, and torpedo bombers at the lowest level. For each one we took on, another 5 would emerge. In the fierce clash that followed, Sakai ended up isolated against 15 F-6F Hellcats. Drawing on all the skills honed over years in the cockpit, he endured a grueling 20-minute dogfight that would have doomed any less seasoned flyer. He hid in cloud banks, performed abrupt rolls that pushed his plane to the brink of breaking apart, and at one point evaded pursuit by plunging so near the sea that salt water splashed across his windshield. He downed 1 Hellcat, or at least wounded it, though he realized such victories were insignificant. The U.S. could spare dozens without concern. The numbers from that engagement were grim. Japan committed 450 planes to the Marianas campaign and suffered 480 losses, counting reinforcements, over just 3 days. Task Force 58 sent out almost 1,000 missions on June 19th alone, sacrificing only 29 aircraft while wiping out 2/3 of Japan's carrier-based air force in one afternoon. By October 1944, as Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi officially established the kamikaze special attack groups at Mabalacat in the Philippines, this choice stemmed not from blind zeal, but from unavoidable calculations. Sakai grasped the cold rationale all too well. In a 1998 discussion, he stated, "You have to realize, we were sending out youngsters with just 30 hours in the air to face Americans boasting 300 hours. They struggled even to spot the foe, let alone hit them. Flying in the usual way, they perished without impact. Opting for kamikaze tactics, they could at least inflict some harm on a vessel." It boiled down to basic math. The pilot training system had utterly broken down. The Yukikaze Naval Aviator Preparatory Course rushed trainees through in 90 days, totaling under 100 flying hours. Most had never test-fired their weapons while airborne. Bullets were far too valuable for target practice. Navigation was limited to sights over land. Engaging in aerial combat was out of the question. The American counter was insurmountable. Task Force 38 could field 1-200 aircraft from 17 big carriers and 8 smaller ones. These were steadily replenished. When squadrons took heavy hits, They were pulled back to the U.S. and swapped with new units. Japanese squadrons battled on until total destruction. Sakai's concluding fights occurred amid the protection of the Japanese mainland in 1945. Operating now from Yokosuka Naval Air Base close to Tokyo, he joined efforts to repel B-29 bombing runs and subsequent carrier assaults. The scenes he observed were beyond words. In Operation Tengo, the Okinawa Safeguard of April 1945, Japan unleashed huge kamikaze waves against the invading U.S. Armada. By then, the American Navy had mastered its countermeasures. Radar-guided 5-inch cannons fired at 10,000 yards, 40mm anti-aircraft batteries targeted at 4,000 yards, 20mm guns formed the innermost shield at 2,000 yards, innovative proximity-fused ammunition detonated on its own near incoming planes. Fighter patrols, numbering 50 or more Hellcats, circled at different heights, directed by radar to block attacks 50 miles out. "We'd launch with 100 planes," Sakai remembered. "When we got near the U.S. fleet, only about 20 might remain. From that bunch, perhaps 1 or 2 would strike a target, often a destroyer on sentry duty." The Americans had such vast numbers of vessels that a single destroyer's loss barely registered. The figures from Okinawa are astounding. Japan conducted 1 in 465 kamikaze flights and forfeited over 1,000 more in regular strikes. They submerged 36 U.S. ships and impaired 368 others, yet Task Force 58 stayed entirely effective, conducting 40,000 sorties overall. For each U.S. vessel lost, Japan sacrificed 60 aircraft and their crews. Sakai's ultimate mission took place in early August 1945, mere days prior to Japan's capitulation. Guiding a squadron of Zeros from Yokosuka, he received orders to challenge B-32 Dominator bombers surveying Tokyo. This assignment captured the war's utter pointlessness. Outdated fighters pitted against America's latest bomber, a mere reserve model, since the U.S. enjoyed endless backups in all things. The effort flopped. The B-32s soared too high and swift for the Zeros to reach. Sakai could merely observe as they captured images of Japanese urban areas already turned to rubble. The conflict had effectively ended. Those flights served only to record the ruin. Manufacturing totals revealed the full tale of Japan's aerial downfall. The U.S. built 295,959 planes in total, among them 99,465 fighters. Japan produced 76,320 aircraft, including 30,747 fighters. America alone churned out 9318 aircraft in 1944, surpassing Japan's entire wartime output. Throughout the conflict, the U.S. outproduced Japan in fighter planes alone, surpassing the total output of all Japanese aircraft varieties, though figures merely hint at the broader narrative. By 1945, American planes represented leaps in technology over those from 1941. For instance, the P-51D Mustang reached speeds of 437 mph, far outpacing the Zero's 331 mph. Similarly, the F-4U-4 Corsair achieved a climb rate of 4,500 feet per minute compared to the Zero's 300 mph. In contrast, Japanese designs evolved little. The A-6 Ember 5 that Sakai piloted in 1944 differed only marginally from the 1941 A-6M2, marginally quicker, yet still lacking armor, relying on identical cannons and hampered by the same weak engine. Every plane required a skilled aviator, and in this realm as well, sheer volume favored the Americans decisively. The United States prepared 193,440 pilots over the course of World War II, encompassing 60,156 naval flyers. Japan, meanwhile, managed roughly 15,000 naval aviators and 25,000 Army pilots in total. U.S. training standards remained steady, demanding over 400 hours prior to frontline duty. Japanese programs, however, deteriorated sharply, dropping from 700 to 800 hours in 1941 to just 50 to 100 hours between 1942 and 1945. At the war's close, incoming American pilots often logged more hours than seasoned Japanese trainers. Fellow Japanese aces echoed Sakai's views on the U.S. edge in quantity. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, the nation's top scorer with 87 confirmed kills, confided in Sakai during his final furlough in October 1944. It's not like before, Saburo. Back in 1942, I could venture solo against an entire enemy formation. These days, they swarm in packs of 50, 100, even 200. No chance to turn, nowhere to break away. We're simply swamped by their masses. Nishizawa perished on October 26, 1944, not in battle, but aboard a transport aircraft downed by Hellcats while traveling as a passenger. His end captured the grim essence of the war's later stages, Japan's premier ace, unable to even protect himself. Commander Masatake Okumiya offered the sharpest post-war analysis in his book Zero, co-authored with Jiro Horikoshi. He argued, "We assumed spirit could triumph over material shortcomings. We figured one Japanese flyer equaled 3 Americans. That might have held in 1941. But by 1943, U.S. aircraft surpassed ours. By 1944, their pilots did too. And by 1945, their vast superiority rendered personal prowess moot." Tetsuzo Iwamoto, among the rare elite survivors, later mused, "I'd downed a Hellcat that morning. Come afternoon, 3 others showed up. I bagged 1 more. The following day, 10 arrived." Against such odds, resistance proves futile. Endurance becomes the sole option. A single episode from Sakai's flying days highlighted the personal toll obscured by mere production data. On February 9, 1942, during a low-level assault on a Java airfield, Sakai targeted what seemed a troop carrier. Drawing nearer for the shot, he spotted women and children peering from the windows, Dutch non-combatants fleeing the crumbling Netherlands East Indies. "I held my fire," Sakai remembered. "They weren't fighters, they were families escaping the chaos. I climbed away and rocked my wings, signaling them onward. The Dutch flyer, grasping the intent, responded with a wave. Sakai's escorts, mirroring him, refrained as well. The plane reached safety in Australia, sparing lives that would surely have ended otherwise. That moment of compassion exposed the deeper human side amid the machinery of death. Decades on, at a U.S. aviation gathering in 1982, a Dutch woman, eyes welling with emotion, confronted Sakai. She had been that young girl aboard the plane. Her own life, along with her offspring and their descendants, owed everything to one fleeting choice by an enemy aviator who recognized people, not mere objectives. In his twilight years, Sakai grew vocal in debunking the legends of Japanese fighters and kamikaze airmen. Addressing crowds at U.S. bases and flight exhibits, he dismantled idealized tales of sacrifice for the emperor. "Curious about what kamikaze pilots pondered as they plunged toward your vessels?" he queried a 1991 Naval Academy group. "Not the emperor, not glory, their mothers. They wept for their mothers. I heard it in their final radio calls. Okasan, Okasan, mother, mother, just scared youths, not zealots." He dismissed Bushido with similar candor. It was all hype to coax boys into death. True samurai picked battles wisely and withdrew from bad odds. They weren't fools, we were. We defied the numbers and puzzled over our defeat. Sakai's boldest remarks surfaced alongside Paul Tibbets, Enola Gay pilot, in a shared event. "Had Japan built the atomic bomb ahead of you, and if commanded to unleash it on Los Angeles, I'd have complied instantly. That's warfare. America just waged it more effectively than us." During a 1998 discussion, Sakai voiced his bitterness toward Japan's commanders. "Folks wonder why we persisted in combat, despite knowing Japan's forces simply couldn't prevail. The rank-and-file aviators, those young men perishing in their cockpits, swallowed the government's spin. They held on to the illusion of triumph right up until the collapse. Only the top commanders grasped the reality, opting for honorable suicide rather than the disgrace of capitulation. The warmongers who ignited the conflict understood U.S. might all too well. They'd visited the States, witnessed the vast industrial output, the endless supplies, the cutting-edge innovations. Yet they clung to the idea that Japan's indomitable resolve could trump any shortfall in hardware. They dispatched us to our graves for their fantasies. On the matter of his reported kills, Sakai remained forthright about the gap between documented tallies and exaggerated accounts in print. When U.S. crowds assumed he tallied 64 successes, a figure fabricated by his co-author Martin Kaiden, Sakai set the record straight. The verified count lists 28 confirmed air-to-air triumphs, counting joint efforts. In combat, inflation of feats is commonplace. The true significance lies not in the tally, but in outlasting the ordeal to share the unvarnished realities of warfare. The years following the conflict ushered in surprising bonds among once bitter foes. In May 1982, researcher Henry Sakai facilitated an encounter at the Nimitz Museum between Sakai and Harold Lew Jones, the tail gunner whose fire had shattered Sakai's vision and almost ended his life during the Guadalcanal campaign. What might have turned tense or rancorous instead forged a deep personal link. Sakai presented his pilot's headgear, riddled with punctures from Jones's rounds and marked by decades-old bloodstains. Jones grasped it with unsteady grip, finally comprehending the personal toll of his pinpoint shooting. "I was merely fulfilling my role," Jones murmured. "The fellow in the aircraft never crossed my mind." "You carried out your obligation," Sakai responded. "As did I. We were merely youths fulfilling national service. No grudge exists, just mutual regard." They developed a lasting friendship, exchanging letters steadily until Jones passed away in 2009. Sakai gifted the marred helmet to Jones, insisting it fittingly stayed with the marksman who curtailed his days as a combat flyer. What Sakai eventually realized and sought to convey to post-war Japanese listeners was that U.S. success stemmed not from bravery or prowess, traits shared by both armies, but from methodical excellence in structure, manufacturing, and preparation. The U.S. Navy's aviator development process embodied this strategy. By 1943, it had rolled out an assembly line method for generating flyers, balancing high standards with mass output. This 60-week curriculum delivered aviators boasting at least 400 hours aloft, contrasting sharply with Japan's crumbling program, which by 1945 churned out novices under 100 hours. Sakai's well-known remark about U.S. fighters arriving in hordes captured an exact quantifiable truth. In key engagements, American carrier groups unleashed aircraft in unstoppable barrages. Consider the Battle of the Philippine Sea on June 19, 1944. Japan dispatched 373 planes across 4 assaults, while the U.S. sent up 956 missions from 15 flat tops. Outcome, 315 Japanese losses versus 29 American. The U.S. secured what strategists term numerical supremacy, such lopsided advantage that even superior maneuvering loses its edge. When each Japanese flyer confronted 5, 10, or 15 adversaries, personal talent proved futile. Sakai devoted his later years to fostering ties across old divides. He urged his daughter to attend a U.S. college, advising her, "Master English, absorb democracy, discover the reasons for their success." She eventually wed a U.S. military officer, emblemizing the merger of past adversaries. At aviation events and veteran gatherings, Sakai inscribed signatures next to American Top Guns, swapping insights on particular aerial clashes. Survivors from battles where they'd hunted one another 4 decades prior now chuckled like longtime wingmen. His core advice to Japan's youth stayed unwavering. Our defeat arose from swallowing our own rhetoric. We imagined willpower could defy physical limits. The U.S. triumphed by reckoning accurately. Planes needed, pilots demanded, fuel expended. They crunched the figures. We spun legends. To American listeners, he delivered another insight. Your edge lay in output, yet that output sprang from liberty. Workers in open plants in liberated settings outpaced coerced hands in controlled mills. Your power derived not only from volume, but from the framework generating it. The ultimate ledger of Pacific aerial combat underscores Japan's insurmountable odds. Warship construction. United States built 28 fleet carriers and 71 escorts. Japan managed 6 fleet and 4 escorts. Aviator graduates. U.S. Navy trained 60,956. Japan about 15,000. Aviation gasoline in 1944. U.S. 6.5 billion gallons. Japan 315 million. Each indicator echoed the narrative. America could afford to forfeit 10 aircraft per Japanese loss and still rule through volume alone. In reality, they flipped the script, downing several Japanese for each U.S. casualty, sealing an inevitable verdict. On February 22, 2000, Saburo Sakai joined a ceremonial banquet at the Officers Club of Atsugi Naval Air Station, where the U.S. Navy had welcomed him as a distinguished visitor. Even at 84 years old, he remained mentally acute and composed, positioned amid U.S. naval personnel as he recounted tales of dogfights in the skies and the healing of old wounds after the conflict. Over the course of the meal, Sakai reflected on his shift from combatant to ambassador of harmony. In my younger days, I dedicated myself to eliminating Americans. Now, in my later years, I've focused on forging bonds with them. The latter pursuit has brought far greater satisfaction than the former. As the gathering drew to a close, a youthful U.S. naval pilot, Lieutenant Commander William Johnson, rose to clasp Sakai's hand and express gratitude for his presence. Sakai stood, extended his arm over the table, and abruptly went rigid. Though the grip was exchanged, he toppled back, struck by a severe cardiac seizure. He passed away en route in the speeding ambulance to the Naval Medical Facility, his final deliberate gesture one of outreach to a U.S. naval figure and camaraderie. No one overlooked the profound imagery. The once fierce samurai, who had strived relentlessly to strike down Americans, departed life while offering his palm to one in accord. Saburo Sakai's remark that American aircraft arrived in droves each week, regardless of Japanese aviators downing them routinely, reveals the core reality of mechanized conflict. Personal valor, strategic ingenuity, and martial fervor proved irrelevant against vast resource dominance deployed with relentless efficiency. The figures lay it bare. America manufactured 3.87 times as many planes as Japan, prepared 4.83 times the number of aviators, generated 26.66 times the aviation gasoline, constructed 9.9 times more carriers, and yet secured a favorable exchange rate in victories amid such disparities. Yet, Sakai's deeper insight stemmed from grasping the roots of those disparities. In an interview just 3 months prior to his passing, he observed, "America triumphed because it was a liberated nation geared for all-out battle. Workers who were free opted to assemble aircraft at a pace surpassing that of the coerced hands in our plants. Independent thinkers innovated superior designs beyond what our controlled experts could achieve. Unfettered airmen engaged with greater ingenuity than our conditioned fighters. Those replacement squadrons weren't merely metal and rivets, they embodied the essence of liberty." He halted briefly, then continued, "We believed our cause served a divine emperor. They recognized their struggle as safeguarding their very existence. That's what enabled them to churn out those flocks of planes, educate those multitudes of pilots, and endure those countless sorties. They were protecting ideals truly deserving of defense." The ultimate insight from Saburo Sakai transcends mere data. It concerns the frameworks that generate such outcomes. Japan's officer class clung to excellence via ethereal merit, envisioning elite fighters overcoming hordes of lesser foes. America embraced abundance via methodical manufacturing, irresistible might wielded through science. The warrior confronted the production chain, and the production chain prevailed. Not due to superior bravery or prowess among Americans. Sakai's own record demonstrated that Japanese flyers equaled any in daring and competence. The production chain succeeded by replenishing casualties more swiftly than samurai strikes could deplete them, absorbing errors quicker than adversaries could capitalize, and evolving beyond rigid customs faster than foes could counter. When Sakai noted, "We downed them weakly, yet they returned in batches," he illuminated far more than sky battles. He chronicled the eclipse of the knightly elite and the emergence of factory-driven combat, where success favored not the superior, but the prolific. Within that grim calculus, Japan stood no chance, and Saburo Sakai, as fighter, enduring soul, and eventual harmonizer, served as the embodied chronicle of that shift. His path, from felling U.S. aircraft to clasping hands with U.S. airmen, mirrors Japan's own evolution, from aggressive dominion to allied democracy, from bellicose realm to industrial giant, from seclusion to alliance. The swarms of U.S. planes that overpowered him in battle formed the basis for the comprehension that fostered amity. That final clasp at Atsugi, fulfilled as his existence faded, cemented a mending inscribed across Pacific heavens by youths who battled with utmost resolve, only to learn that utmost fell short against the unyielding arithmetic of American output. The batches invariably returned, and ultimately, the batches invariably prevailed,